The new pope hides a dark past the Vatican tried to erase in the heart of Vatican City. Beneath the ancient spires and gold-draped ceilings, the world watched in awe as white smoke billowed from the Sistine Chapel. It was the signal that a new pope had been chosen. The bells rang, echoing across the cobblestone streets of Rome, while cameras flashed and crowds cried with anticipation. Moments later, a quiet man stepped onto the balcony, calm, composed, seemingly ordinary. To many, he was a breath of fresh air, humble, modern, and deeply spiritual. His name was unfamiliar to the masses, but his presence carried the gravity of destiny. The media quickly embraced the narrative of a new era for the Catholic Church, one that promised reform, transparency, and compassion. But as with many stories cloaked in divine light, there was a shadow beneath the surface, waiting to be revealed. He spoke softly, with a voice that trembled just enough to feel authentic. His first blessings resonated not just through the crowd, but across continents. People felt they were witnessing a rebirth, not just of a man assuming one of the most powerful spiritual positions on earth, but of the Church itself. He declined the traditional golden throne, refused the papal palace, and preferred simpler clothing over ornate robes. The world adored him for this humility. Finally, a people's pope, some said. A shepherd for the lost, others proclaimed. Social media exploded with hashtags, headlines, and hope. But in the celebration, few asked the critical question, who exactly was this man before he became pope? The Church provided only fragments of his biography, a vague timeline of priesthood, service in obscure dioceses, and a few humble photos. To many, that was enough. But to others, the gaps were too wide, too deliberate. Among the handful of journalists who dared to look closer was an independent Vatican analyst who noticed something strange. Unlike his predecessors, the new pope had almost no public footprint before a certain year. Archived sermons were missing. Old interviews had been erased or sealed. Even the Catholic universities where he claimed to have studied offered no records. At first, this seemed like a harmless oversight. After all, not every clergyman lives a life documented in headlines. But as the analyst dug deeper, inconsistencies began to pile up. Names he had worked with contradicted one another. A small parish he allegedly led for 5 years showed no sign he had ever been there. Something didn't add up. Still, the new pope's popularity surged, and the Church moved swiftly to silence whispers of doubt. But the truth, once stirred, never rests. And the world had no idea just how much it didn't know about the man in white. The deeper one investigates the early life of the new pope, the more a strange fog seems to settle over his past. It's as if entire years were quietly extracted from history, scrubbed clean of detail and deliberately left blank. Between 1989 and 1995, there is no official record of where he lived, preached, or studied. For a figure who eventually rose to the highest seat of the Catholic Church, such an absence is more than suspicious, it is unprecedented. A Vatican source, speaking off the record, once whispered, "Those were the years of silence." But silence can often speak louder than words. In Argentina, his supposed home country, local records contain conflicting entries. One diocese lists him as a visiting priest, another as unassigned. When contacted, a bishop who allegedly worked closely with him replied coldly, "I don't remember him." That same bishop died in a car crash 2 months later. In the barrios of Buenos Aires, old residents were questioned. Some remembered a foreign priest who spoke with a European accent and visited poor communities offering medicine and prayers, but he never gave his name. He came and went like a ghost. A retired nun described him as kind but guarded, always looking over his shoulder. His photographs from that period, if they existed at all, were nowhere to be found. A few grainy images surfaced from underground Catholic circles, showing a man with similar features, dressed in plain robes, standing beside children in remote villages. Was it him? The Church neither confirmed nor denied. What was clear is that this stage of his life had been redacted with professional precision. But who had done it? And more importantly, why? A confidential source from within the Vatican archives revealed that shortly before the conclave that elected him, a file marked Sacramentum Obscurum had been moved from the sealed vaults to the Office of Papal Vetting, a rare process used only when a candidate's past raises internal alarms. That file, believed to contain sensitive information, has never been made public. But a leaked memo shows it included references to dissident activity, clandestine travel, and an entity referred to only as La Orden del Velo. No one inside the Vatican has ever publicly acknowledged such an order exists. The source who shared this died of cardiac arrest the following week. Was this simply a coincidence, or part of a much larger effort to bury the past of the man now sitting on the throne of St. Peter? The questions only grow, and with them, the suspicion that the new pope's past is not just hidden, but protected. Inside Vatican City, where walls have ears and shadows carry secrets, murmurs began to spread. Low-ranking clergy, archivists, and former aides spoke of an unspoken tension that had settled after the new pope's election. It wasn't visible during the public ceremonies or official announcements, it lingered in private corridors and silent glances. A senior member of the College of Cardinals, under strict anonymity, revealed that during the final rounds of voting, there had been hesitation. Some ballots had been cast not with conviction, but with fear. One cardinal reportedly stood and said, "We are being guided. But by whom, I do not know." These words were not recorded in the official minutes. But those who heard them never forgot. As the weeks went on, subtle changes in Vatican protocol raised more eyebrows. Certain archives became restricted. A long-scheduled internal audit of the Jesuit order was postponed indefinitely. And most notably, the new pope dismissed 3 senior advisors, without explanation. Among those dismissed was Cardinal Fiorenzo Damiani, a historian and theologian known for his encyclopedic knowledge of papal lineage. He had previously worked as the custodian of the secret archives. His sudden removal came just days after he requested access to File 8479A, an allegedly sealed dossier related to the Pope's time in Central America during the early 90s. After his dismissal, Damiani disappeared from public view. Some say he retired to a monastery in silence. Others believe he was silenced. Meanwhile, the Vatican's press office dismissed growing rumors as speculative fiction, urging the faithful to focus on the Church's new direction. But for every denial, new information surfaced: letters unsigned, emails wiped clean, testimonies that vanished before reaching journalists. A pattern had emerged, and it was no longer possible to ignore. The Vatican was closing in on itself, protecting something, or someone, with unusual intensity. Behind the gates, a network of insiders began to form. Priests, archivists, and even a former Swiss guard discreetly shared pieces of a puzzle they didn't fully understand. One of them, a middle-aged priest named Tomas, had spent time with the new pope decades earlier in Guatemala. In a rare and trembling interview, he recalled a night when the now pontiff had come to him shaken, clutching a sealed envelope and whispering, "If anything happens to me, this is what they fear." The envelope, however, was lost in a fire years later. Or so Tomas believed. When pressed further, he added something chilling: he was not afraid of death. He was afraid of being remembered. Those words haunted the journalist who recorded them. Why would a man destined for sainthood fear his own past so deeply? Unless that past was never meant to come to light. Unless that past, if revealed, could unravel everything. Among the many mysteries buried within Vatican lore, few are as elusive as the whispered mention of L'Ordine del Velo, the Order of the Veil. While officially unrecognized by the Church, references to this clandestine brotherhood appear in scattered, declassified communiques dating back to the 1950s. They were said to operate on the periphery of ecclesiastical authority, answering to no bishop or cardinal, reporting only to an unseen source within the deepest sanctums of Vatican power. Their purpose? To protect the sanctity of the Church, not by guiding its faithful, but by erasing its flaws. Former theologians and investigative clergy have speculated that the order's mission was to manage threats, internal and external, by any means necessary: misinformation, discrediting, removal. In cases where papal candidates posed danger to church stability, it was their job to reshape the narrative. If such a group truly existed, their involvement with the new pope could explain much. Hints of the order's connection to the new pontiff emerged in a leaked transcript from a Vatican security meeting dated 2 months before the conclave. In it, an official mentions Protocol 12-Volt, a rare and classified operation, authorized only under extreme reputational threat. The subject of the protocol is redacted, but the timing aligns with the sudden reactivation of dormant security teams known internally as custodes. One Vatican whistleblower, who later vanished while traveling through Eastern Europe, claimed these custodes were sent to recover or destroy any remaining documents tied to the Pope's missionary work in conflict zones during the early 90s. They erased entire missions from memory, he said. Even the people who served with him are scared to speak. What could be so dangerous about that period? What did the Order of the Veil see that led them to such measures? Independent investigators began tracking movements of known church agents across Latin America and Africa during the years in question. Unusual patterns emerged: funding trails ending abruptly, churches rebuilt over demolished buildings, clergy transferred suddenly with no records. One site in El Salvador, now a school, once housed a compound that reportedly treated wounded civilians during a civil war. A local woman, whose brother was a teenage soldier, claimed the new pope, then a mysterious foreign priest, had administered last rites to fighters from both sides. But there were also whispers that he worked alongside intelligence operatives, spiritual cover for darker missions. These stories, unverified yet haunting, point to a life lived in deep contradiction. If the Order of the Veil had been involved in protecting such a secret, it would mean the Church didn't merely overlook the Pope's past, it actively helped bury it. And perhaps, they still are. Deep within the Apostolic Palace, beyond the reach of tourists and scholars, lies a vaulted chamber accessible only to select members of the Curia, the Room of Penitent Seals. This chamber houses confessions deemed too dangerous or controversial to be filed under ordinary canonical archives. Most were deposited by priests in war zones, political defectors turned clergy, or bishops who feared public scandal. In early 2023, one such sealed confession resurfaced. According to an anonymous archivist, it bore the mark Confessio Maxima, reserved for revelations with potential to damage the institution of the Church. The subject of the confession? A young priest working under a false name in Nicaragua during the final years of dictatorship. The details are shrouded in redaction, but one thing stood out: a handwritten note at the top of the file with the initials matching the new Pope's birth name. The confession, written by a now-deceased cardinal, described a covert program wherein select missionaries were used as intermediaries between Western intelligence groups and guerrilla leaders, ostensibly to broker peace, but in truth to influence civil outcomes through spiritual manipulation. The cardinal wrote of a young clergyman who served as the primary go-between. Fluent in multiple languages, politically savvy, and highly disciplined, the man would deliver messages wrapped in scripture, sermons timed to trigger uprisings, and last rites offered only to those who cooperated with the cause. The cardinal claimed he tried to warn Rome, but was ordered to stand down. The note concluded with a chilling sentence: "He has the eyes of a saint, but he walks with the silence of a soldier." If this man was indeed the same person who now wears the papal ring, then the Church did more than promote a servant of God, it elevated a ghost from the shadows of Cold War tactics. This confession, once dismissed as paranoia, was re-examined when a journalist obtained a classified summary through leaked internal Vatican correspondence. Cross-referencing timelines, travel logs, and church appointments, she discovered that several promotions in the Pope's clerical rise occurred immediately after visits to regions suffering political unrest. These visits were brief, unannounced, and always followed by restructuring within the local dioceses. The journalist attempted to publish her findings but was pressured into silence through threats to her family and the freezing of her assets. She now lives in exile under a pseudonym. Before disappearing, she left a cryptic message online: "Look to the bloodstained pages hidden in white." What does this mean? Could there be physical proof locked away in the Vatican, or in the memory of those who remain too afraid to speak? One thing is clear: the deeper we look, the more the confession becomes less of an allegation and more of a confirmation. While the Vatican's inner circle tightened around the new Pope, one name kept resurfacing: Father Matteo Bianchi, a Jesuit scholar known for his brilliance, and his rebellion. Matteo was once a rising star within the theological community, celebrated for his writings on spiritual authority and ecclesiastical reform. But his promising career took a dark turn after he publicly questioned the rapid ascension of the man who would later become Pope. In a lecture delivered in Prague, recorded but swiftly censored, Matteo posed a question that silenced the room: can a shepherd lead the flock if he never truly walked among them? Within weeks, his Vatican access was revoked, his publications halted, and his name erased from official theological circles. But he did not stop investigating. In fact, he doubled down, convinced that something was being hidden not just from the Church, but from all of humanity. Matteo's private research, later leaked through anonymous online channels, suggested that he had uncovered correspondence between the Pope and high-ranking members of a global intelligence alliance. These letters, encrypted and translated from archaic Latin, included directives regarding strategic movements in conflict zones, masked as pastoral missions. Matteo believed that the Pope had, at one time, been part of a covert network of clergy who operated as field agents during major geopolitical upheavals. He referred to them as the Silent Shepherds. His theory was considered absurd by some, dangerous by others. But then Matteo disappeared. The last trace of him was a blurry surveillance image taken in a Berlin train station, where he was seen boarding a train carrying a leather briefcase. Days later, that train was found abandoned. No passengers. No luggage. No bodies. Inside the Vatican, Matteo's name became taboo. When asked, the official response was that he had voluntarily withdrawn from public life. But in a chance interview, an elderly librarian from the Pontifical Gregorian University recalled something strange. Matteo had once confided in him that he had received a letter from the future Pope, years before his election, urging him to choose silence over revelation. The librarian, who had dismissed the claim at the time, now regretted not pressing further. What had Matteo known that made him a threat? And more disturbingly, why did the Pope once fear his voice? Some believe that Matteo's briefcase still exists, hidden in one of the underground sanctuaries beneath Rome. If found, it could be the key to unlocking the final truth. But as with all things the Vatican wishes to remain buried, one must ask, at what cost? As the speculation around the new Pope's past grew louder outside the Vatican's walls, something unexpected began to happen inside the Church itself. A quiet schism, too subtle to be called a rebellion, but too widespread to be ignored, started taking shape. Bishops from smaller dioceses, especially in Africa, Eastern Europe, and parts of South America, began voicing cryptic concerns in their homilies. They didn't name the Pope directly, but they spoke of a shepherd who no longer hears the voice of the flock, and warned of a time when the robes of holiness conceal a war of memory. These sermons, posted online by brave seminarians, spread like wildfire. The Vatican, in response, issued a global directive: all theological statements concerning papal history must be approved before public release. It was the first such order in decades. What was the Church so afraid would be said? In private gatherings, seasoned theologians began debating whether the Pope's legitimacy could be spiritually valid if his election had been based on omission or misdirection. Could a man of God, whose past involved manipulation and secrecy, truly serve as the vicar of Christ? Some claimed yes, that redemption erases all sin. Others argued no, that truth, when denied, corrodes even the holiest of mantles. A leaked audio recording from a closed-door Vatican symposium captured a senior bishop stating, "We haven't throned a man whose silence thunders louder than Scripture." These words sent shockwaves through clergy networks. Even lay Catholics began asking questions. What had been whispered in corridors was now being posted in forums, podcasts, and international headlines. The Vatican remained silent. But silence, in this case, was its own admission. What few realized, however, was that the Pope himself had begun to change. No longer appearing as open or cheerful in public, his face seemed hardened, his words more calculated. A former aide revealed that the pontiff had become increasingly withdrawn, requesting fewer audiences and holding longer private meetings with his most trusted advisors. One night, that aide allegedly found him alone in the chapel, holding a tattered photograph, burned on one edge, of a group of men in military fatigues standing in front of a rural church. One of them, unmistakably younger, was him. When the aide asked what it was, the Pope replied, "A debt I will never repay." That night, Vatican security was doubled. Files were moved. And the aide was reassigned to a mission in Siberia the next day. What truth did the photo hold? And why did the Pope cling to it with such dread? As the echoes of apostasy continued to ripple outward, it became clear, the past was no longer buried, it was rising. As the world watched, waiting for clarity, the Vatican moved in paradox, at once more open and more closed than ever. Pilgrims still crowded St. Peter's Square. Blessings were given. Masses were held. But beneath the surface, an unshakable tension gripped the Holy See. The new Pope, once hailed as a symbol of transparency and modern grace, had become a figure wrapped in contradiction. On the surface, he continued to preach mercy, unity, and humility. But within the Curia, he was now referred to behind closed doors as Papa Albatus, the White One, evoking not purity, but emptiness. For many, it wasn't just the fear of what he might have done in the past, it was the fear of what he might still be protecting. The rituals continued, the world moved on, but in the corners of sacred halls and in the minds of a growing number of the faithful, one question lingered: who is he, really? In a final twist of fate, a sealed envelope arrived at an independent news agency in Geneva. It contained 3 items: a microfilm reel, a handwritten letter signed only with the letter M, and a photograph of the young Pope with a man later identified as a high-ranking officer in a now-defunct European intelligence agency. The reel, once digitized, revealed footage of the then-priest officiating a covert ceremony in a war-torn village, where soldiers and civilians alike were blessed before entering a compound that was later destroyed. The letter read, "History has many authors, but truth has only one. I am sorry I was part of the lie." The media frenzy that followed was intense but brief. Many doubted the authenticity, others were silenced. The Vatican declined comment. Days later, the Pope delivered a homily unlike any other: no script, no choir, no protocol. He spoke plainly, his voice hoarse, to a silent square: "What you carry in your past may not define you. But what you hide, eventually does." After that moment, something changed. The Pope began to withdraw from public life. Aides claimed he was ill. Some believed he was writing a final document, his true confession. But no such document was ever released. A year later, he resigned, citing spiritual fatigue. His final act was to remove access restrictions on select Vatican archives, though many believe the most sensitive files had long been destroyed. His whereabouts after retirement remain unknown. Some say he lives in a hidden monastery, others believe he died quietly, buried without ceremony. What remains is a story wrapped in mystery, drenched in politics, faith, and fear. A story that raises more questions than answers. But as long as cathedrals stand and bells ring, as long as the faithful seek light in the darkness, one truth will endure: even the man who wears white casts a shadow. And some shadows, no matter how hidden, never truly disappear.